How does one man, armed with little more than a rifle and sheer will, stand against an entire army? How can a single soldier, isolated and presumed dead, change the course of a battle, and perhaps the war itself? This is not a legend. This is the story of a soldier who was left behind, who saw the enemy advance, and who made a decision that would defy all military logic. For 72 relentless hours, he would not hide, he would not surrender, he would fight. What happened next in the frozen forests of Eastern Europe did not just become a regimental legend, it altered the tactical reality for an entire front. This is the story of how one man fought for 72 hours alone. To understand the sheer impossibility of this feat, we must first set the stage. It is late January 1945. The location is the dense, snow-laden woods near the village of Nieglewy in northern Poland. The air is bitingly cold, a characteristic feature of the Eastern Front's brutal winter. The Soviet juggernaut is advancing westward in a massive offensive, pushing the battered but still dangerous German forces back towards the borders of the Reich.
Our story centers on the 8th Guards Rifle Corps of the Soviet Second Shock Army. Among the thousands of men in this formidable unit was a 19-year-old junior sergeant, a machine gunner named Vladimir Makarovich Krupin. Young, but already hardened by years of warfare, Krupin was a part of a crew manning a heavy 7.62mm PM M1910 Maxim machine gun, the reliable, water-cooled workhorse of the Red Army.
His unit was engaged in a fierce, fluid battle with elements of the German 5th Jaeger Division. The fighting was characterized by sudden, violent assaults and rapid movements through the trackless forest. On January 25th, Krupin's company was ordered to assault a series of fortified German positions guarding a vital crossroads. The attack was met with a storm of mortar, machine gun, and sniper fire. In the ensuing chaos of the firefight, as the Soviet line surged forward and then was forced to consolidate, a critical miscommunication occurred.
Believing all their men had either advanced or fallen, the command post ordered supporting artillery to fire directly on the company's previous position to target a German counterattack forming there. The radio crackled with the coordinates. The shells were already in the air. For young Vladimir Krupin, manning his heavy Maxim on the flank, the world was about to shrink to the size of a small, snowy clearing, surrounded by enemies and cut off from everything he knew. The first Soviet artillery shells began to fall at approximately 14:30 hours. For Krupin, the sound was initially reassuring, the deep thump of 122mm howitzers providing support. But that reassurance turned to sheer terror in a matter of seconds as the impacts walked closer and then directly onto his position. Dirt, snow, and splintered pine trees erupted around him. He threw himself to the ground, the concussive blasts pounding the air from his lungs. This was not overshot. This was targeted fire on his own coordinates.
When the barrage finally lifted after 10 agonizing minutes, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the crackle of burning trees. Krupin raised his head. His section was gone. The soldiers he had been fighting alongside mere minutes before were now casualties of the friendly fire. He was alone. As the smoke cleared, new sounds reached him. The guttural shouts of German, the crunch of snow under boots. The Jaeger counterattack was advancing, moving through the forest directly towards him. He was now hundreds of meters behind the new German front line.
His first instinct was survival. He checked his Maxim. Miraculously, it was intact, its thick water jacket peppered with shrapnel scars, but unbreached. He had 4 full 250-round cloth ammunition belts. His personal weapon was a Mosin Nagant rifle, and he had 2 F1 grenades. It was now 1500 hours. The pale winter sun was already beginning to dip below the tree line, and the temperature was plummeting. He had a choice: attempt a desperate, likely suicidal dash back to Soviet lines through unknown enemy territory, or stay.
He looked at the advancing German infantry, perhaps a full platoon of 40 men, moving confidently, believing the position had been neutralized. He thought of his comrades, his unit. If this German force consolidated here unchallenged, they could launch a devastating flank attack on his battalion. His decision was made. He would not run. He would fight. He carefully repositioned the heavy machine gun, its tripod sinking into the deep snow, giving him a clear field of fire down a forest path the Germans were using. He took a deep, steadying breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He chambered the first round. The lead German squad was now just 150 yards away, their figures clear through the iron sights. He squeezed the trigger.
The deafening roar of the Maxim shattered the silence. The long, sweeping burst caught the German platoon completely by surprise. The first squad was cut down almost to a man. The other scattered for cover, confused and disoriented. In those first few minutes, Kruppen had inflicted devastating casualties, and more importantly, had sown chaos. The Germans, believing they had stumbled into a strong point, pulled back to reorganize. For Kruppen, the first battle was over, but the war had just begun. Over the next few hours, he played a deadly game of cat and mouse. He would fire several bursts from one position. Then, before German mortars could zero in, he would drag his 60-pound machine gun and ammunition through the snow to a new location 50 yards away. He created the illusion of multiple, prepared defensive positions. To the German commanders, it seemed inconceivable that they were facing a single, isolated teenager. They believed they were dealing with a determined and well-entrenched Soviet rear guard.
By nightfall, they had called up a pair of MG-42 teams to suppress him. The distinctive ripping sound of the Hitlersäge, Hitler's buzzsaw, now answered his own Maxim's slower, deeper report. Tracers lit up the darkening forest in a deadly exchange. Kruppen, using his knowledge of the local terrain from the earlier advance, held his ground. He fought through the night, catching glimpses of enemy movement in the moonlight reflecting off the snow. He was cold, hungry, and alone, but the adrenaline and a profound sense of duty kept him at his gun.
Dawn on January 26th revealed a grim scene. The snow around his various positions was churned up and stained. But the Germans were not finished. They now knew the approximate area of this stubborn pocket of resistance, and they were determined to eliminate it. A fresh company was tasked with clearing the woods.
This time, they moved more cautiously, using fire and maneuver tactics. Kruppen's world shrank further. He was pinned down for hours at a time, only daring to move or fire in short, devastating bursts to conserve his precious ammunition. He was running low on water for the gun's cooling jacket. He solved this by packing snow into it, a risky move that could cause cracking if done too quickly, but a necessity. His food was gone. His only sustenance was the snow he melted in his mouth. The psychological toll was immense. The loneliness was a physical weight. Every shadow, every sound of a branch breaking could mean death. Yet he held. He knew every hour he tied down these enemy forces was an hour his main line could strengthen its defenses.
By the afternoon of the second day, January 27th, the situation had become truly desperate. Kruppen was down to his last ammunition belt. His Maxim gun was hot, the paint blistered, the barrel needing to be changed, a complex and dangerous task under fire that he had to perform with numb, frozen fingers. The Germans, frustrated by this tenacious holdout, escalated their response. At around 1600 hours, Kruppen heard a new, terrifying sound. The low grumble of a diesel engine and the screech of metal tracks. Peering through a gap in the undergrowth, he saw his worst nightmare materialize. A German Sturmgeschütz III assault gun, a turretless tracked vehicle armed with a powerful 75mm main gun, was grinding its way through the forest, pushing smaller trees aside like matchsticks.
Infantrymen crouched behind its armored bulk, using it for cover.
This was the crisis point. A rifle was useless. His machine gun, even with ammunition, would merely scratch the paint on the Stug's frontal armor. His 2 grenades were equally futile. He was out of options, out of time, and nearly out of hope. The assault gun stopped, its gun traversing, searching for the source of the resistance. It was now or never.
Kruppen knew he could not destroy the beast, but he could blind it. He made a calculated, incredibly brave decision. He would not flee, he would attack. Waiting until the infantry behind the Stug were distracted, communicating with the crew, he low-crawled through the snow, using the covering noise of the idling engine to mask his movement. He moved in a wide arc, coming at the assault gun from its flank, its most vulnerable angle for infantry attack. He was just 30 yards away. He could smell the exhaust fumes, hear the voices of the German soldiers. He pulled the pin on his first F1 grenade, let the spoon fly, counted to 2, and stood up, hurling it not at the armored hull, but in a high arc to land directly on the vehicle's engine deck. The grenade detonated with a sharp crack. It did no serious damage, but the explosion and shrapnel rattling against the hull had the desired effect. The infantry, thinking they were under attack by anti-tank infantry, scattered for cover.
In that moment of confusion, Kruppen made his move. He sprinted, not away, but directly towards the now isolated Sturmgeschütz. The vehicle commander, startled by the explosion and the sight of a lone soldier charging them, instinctively ducked inside and slammed the hatch shut. Kruppen reached the vehicle. He pulled the pin on his last grenade and, in an act of stunning audacity, jammed it into the narrow gap between the closed commander's hatch and the hull. He then leaped off the engine deck and sprinted back into the forest. The grenade detonated. Inside, the effect would have been catastrophic, a blast of superheated gas and shrapnel in a confined space. The Stug fell silent. Its engine died. The supporting infantry, now without their armored spearhead, and believing a larger Soviet force was in the woods, withdrew in disarray. Kruppen had done the impossible. He had not only survived an encounter with an assault gun, he had neutralized it.
But the cost was high. He was now completely unarmed, except for his empty rifle. He had no grenades, and his machine gun, back at his position, was out of ammunition. The third night, January 27th into the 28th, was the longest. The cold was paralyzing. Exhaustion threatened to pull him into a sleep from which he would never wake. He was haunted by the sounds of the battle, by the ghosts of the men he had killed. He was a phantom, a ghost in a forest he had turned into a personal fortress. As the sun rose on January 28th, a strange quiet had settled over the forest. For over 60 hours, Vladimir Kruppen had been a one-man army, a persistent thorn in the side of a German battalion. He had disrupted their supply lines, pinned down significant forces, and destroyed a vital assault gun. But now he was spent. He had no means to fight back. He found a deep foxhole, curled up inside, and prepared for the end, whether by enemy bayonet or the relentless cold.
What he didn't know was that his solitary war had achieved a strategic miracle. The constant disruptive fighting in their rear had convinced the German local command that a significant Soviet force had been encircled but was still combat effective. Instead of continuing their planned counterattack on the main Soviet line, they had been forced to commit nearly 2 companies, hundreds of men, to contain what they thought was a battalion-sized pocket. This diversion of resources had left their own flank weak. At 1100 hours, Kruppen heard a sound that made his heart stop. The roar of a new Soviet artillery barrage. But this time, it was not falling on him. It was hammering the main German positions to his west. Then a new sound, the triumphant roar of Hurrah! As the 8th Guards Rifle Corps launched their own major assault. The Soviet infantry, fresh and in overwhelming strength, crashed through the weakened German lines. They advanced rapidly, mopping up isolated resistance. A Soviet scout platoon, moving cautiously through the woods where Kruppen had fought, stumbled upon the scene of devastation. The shot-up German positions, the destroyed Sturmgeschütz, its hatches still sealed shut, and the bodies of dozens of enemy soldiers. Then they found him, a lone, emaciated, frost-bitten figure, barely conscious in a foxhole, clutching an empty rifle. At first they thought he was a German straggler, but as they approached, he managed to whisper his name and unit. The scouts were incredulous. The legend of the lone holdout was well known among the forward troops, but everyone assumed he and his entire section had been wiped out days ago. He was gently carried back to the Soviet lines, wrapped in a greatcoat, and given warm food and vodka. As he told his story to stunned intelligence officers, the scale of his accomplishment began to emerge. He had single-handedly killed or wounded an estimated 35 to 50 German soldiers. He had destroyed a Sturmgeschütz assault gun. Most importantly, he had disrupted the German counterattack plans for 3 full days, directly contributing to the success of the Soviet offensive on that sector. Vladimir Makarovich Kruppen did not just survive his ordeal, he became a symbol of the resilience and sheer stubborn courage of the Soviet soldier. After receiving medical treatment for exposure and exhaustion, he was returned to his unit, not as a junior sergeant, but as a hero. For his actions between January 25th and 28th, 1945, he was recommended for the Soviet Union's highest military honor, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The official citation detailed his exceptional courage, military prowess, and dedication to his motherland. His story was printed in army newspapers, a potent piece of propaganda, but also a genuine account of almost superhuman endurance. The legacy of his 3-day stand was not just in the body count or the destroyed vehicle. It was a tactical lesson in the power of individual initiative and the disproportionate impact a single, determined soldier can have on the battlefield. He had, through his actions, changed the local tactical situation, which in turn contributed to the larger operational success of the Second Shock Army. Kruppen survived the war. He returned to a quiet life, forever marked by those 72 hours in the Polish forest. His story, once a celebrated legend, gradually faded from public memory, becoming just one of countless incredible tales from the Eastern Front. But the record remains, a testament to the fact that in the vast impersonal machinery of total war, the will of one man can, against all odds, make a difference. The solitary war of Vladimir Kruppen stands as a stark reminder of the individual human spirit blazing brightly amidst the darkness of conflict. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to my channel as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.